We'll move to question time, and I call Senator Birmingham.
Thank you, President. President, my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Farrell. Minister, did Mr Albanese promise to cut the energy bills for Australians by saying, and I quote, "Our plan will cut family power bills by $275 a year by 2025?
Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Birmingham for his question. It is a little bit rich after years and years and years and years of failing to do anything about energy prices, or failing to do anything about a plan to deal with issues related to climate change, that the opposition should be asking this question. What was the first thing that, or one of the first things that Prime Minister Albanese did on coming to office? He realised the inaction of the opposition on this issue of electricity prices, and he took action. And he took action. He took action in a way which.
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Senator Birmingham.
Order on the question of direct relevance by the minister. It was a very narrow question, asking specifically to confirm or not whether or not the Prime Minister made a particular statement about cutting electricity bills by $275 a year. It's a yes or no answer, Minister.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. I will direct the senator to the body of your question. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank you for that clarification by the leader on the question. Look, you can't answer that question in the way in which the opposition would like it answered. You can only answer that question. You can only
Minister, just a moment, Senator Birmingham. Minister Farrell, Senator Birmingham.
President, a further point of order in relation to relevance. The minister is now claiming that he can't answer a question as to whether or not the now Prime Minister said something or didn't something. Well, I seek leave, President, to table the speech by the Prime Minister to the NFF 2022 National Conference, in which he said our plan
Senator
will cut
Birmingham,
family power bills
Senator
by
Birmingham.
$275 a year,
Senator Birmingham.
one of the 97 occasions on which he made such a statement.
Thank you.
Sleep.
Senator Birmingham, I will check to see if leave is granted. Is leave granted?
Customarily, President, an opportunity is given to the other side to look at the document. I'm happy to examine the document closely and advise the leader.
Thank you. So, Senator Birmingham, I understand the government will come back to you. I will again remind the Minister of your question. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. Look, the point I was making was a simple one. You cannot answer in a simple way the question that you're seeking an answer to without explaining the lack of action by the previous government on electricity prices. We came in to government finding all of these areas where there's been neglect, and we've set about one by one seeking to fix.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Birmingham, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Is it still the Albanese Labor government's policy that Australians will see their power bills fall by $275 a year by 2025, as stated by Prime Minister Albanese on no fewer than 97 occasions prior to the election?
Minister Farrell.
It's still the wish and the desire of the Albanese government to ensure that we do everything as a government to put downward pressure on electricity prices for ordinary Australians in terms of their household bills and companies who operate now in an environment where there's upward pressure on electricity bills. We're about putting downward pressure on those bills, and that's exactly what we're doing. Why did we cap? Why did this government cap gas bills, Madam President? Why did we cap coal prices? We capped them to put that downward pressure on those bills. And to your everlasting disgrace, you opposed it.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Birmingham, second supplementary.
President, will the minister admit that the Albanese Labor government has abandoned its promise to cut power bills by $275 a year by 2025, and that in fact on the 97+ occasions it promised that prior to the last election, it was simply seeking to deceive the Australian people, deliberately so, before they got the chance to vote?
Order. I'm not going to call the minister until there's silence. Order on my left and my right. Senator Gallagher. Senator Gallagher. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. Well, what a cheek! What a cheek! Asking the question about deceiving the Australian people. Who replaced you? Who replaced you as finance minister? It was Scott Morrison. But did he tell you? Did he tell you? Did he tell you? He didn't even tell you that he replaced you as finance minister.
Minister Farrell, just a moment, Senator Birmingham. There needs to be order. Senator Birmingham.
The direct part of relevance there. You couldn't be more irrelevant or more hopeless or more unable to answer the question or less willing to talk about $275 than Senator Farrell is.
Senator Birmingham, resume your seat. Order. Order. It is the custom in this chamber to allow leaders some leeway, but seriously, points of order need to be made directly. Minister Farrell, I remind you of Senator Birmingham's question. Please continue.
Thank you, President. And I can assure the opposition, and I can assure the Australian people, and I can assure businesses in Australia that this government, this government is serious about putting downward pressure on electricity prices. That's why we've taken the hard decisions. Contrary to a lot of interested groups in this country.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Stewart.
Thank you. I'm smiling because it's like those opposite don't own a mirror when they're talking about lies and deceit. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Senator Gallagher. Can the Minister outline how the government's proposed reforms to the safeguard mechanism will ensure Australia meets its legislated emissions reduction target?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Stewart for the question on this, a really important question, particularly on the day when we've got the latest IPCC report. Right now, the Parliament has an opportunity to get Australia's biggest emitters to reduce their emissions. The Safeguard Mechanism reform is key to meeting our legislated emissions reductions target, which is something that this chamber supported late last year, a 43% reduction target. The Liberal National Government wasted a decade with inaction on climate change, we all know that, but this reform will give the market and heavy industry the certainty that they have been seeking and asking for some time. It will drive change amongst the 215 biggest emitters in the country, who represent 28% of our overall emissions. It will take, if it's passed, 205 million tonnes of carbon out of the air by 2030. Wow. That's the equivalent of taking 2/3 of the cars off Australian roads. As former Energy Security Board Chair and current Chair of the Carbon Market Institute, Kerry Schott, has said about these reforms, it will drive decarbonisation in Australia's highest polluting industrial facilities. She explained that it is designed to benefit the companies already doing a lot while allowing others to catch up without a prohibitive upfront expense. The reform has strong and broad-based support across the economy and community. We are in good faith negotiations with those senators who are engaged, none of those opposite, of course, who have dealt themselves out of any discussion. And I support the comments made by Senator Lambie this morning on ABC Radio National when she said we could have a starting point through in early 2011 and 2012. We missed that opportunity. This is a great opportunity. Let's pounce on it. At the last election, the Australian people clearly voted for change. They wanted to end the climate wars, and we've got the chance to do that.
Time for answering has expired. Senator Stewart, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Could the minister update the Senate on the findings of the latest IPCC synthesis report and how this underscores the need for the parliament to support the government's proposed reforms to the safeguard mechanism?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Stewart, for the supplementary. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's latest synthesis report makes clear there is a rapidly closing window for action and economic transition. Simply put, action is needed right now. We are starting well behind where we should. After a decade of the denial, delay, dysfunction from those opposite, they had 22 failed energy policies and couldn't land one of them, including the safeguard mechanism now, which they seemingly oppose. We've not wasted a single day since coming to office. The IPCC synthesis report highlights the need for action. To keep 1.5 degrees within reach, we have to act fast. The safeguard reforms could start to take effect on July 1, just over 100 days away. So it's action that's needed now that will determine the future of our planet, and I would urge senators to support the Safeguard Mechanism bill when it comes to this chamber later this week.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Stewart, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Can Minister Gallagher update the Senate on what opportunities are presented by the Albanese government's plans and what the potential costs of squandering those opportunities would be?
Minister.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Stewart for the supplementary. The Albanese government has worked constructively with businesses to formulate a plan that will end the policy uncertainty and enable a predictable emissions reduction pathway to net zero by 2050. The Safeguard Mechanism reforms are the next step in supporting Australia's biggest emitters remain competitive in a decarbonising global economy whilst reducing their emissions. These reforms, importantly, are supported by the Business Council of Australia, Australian Industry Group and the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who have publicly supported this approach through the reforms to the Safeguard Mechanism. We cannot squander this opportunity that we can to get moving, to cover the 215 facilities covered by the mechanism. Many of them already have signed up to net zero by 2050. We don't want to end up where we were years ago under this mob, where we had total lack of action on climate change.
Senator Cash, first question.
Thank you, President. My question is also to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Farrell. Minister, your government's submission to the Fair Work Commission last year recommended that the Fair Work Commission ensures real wages of Australia's low-paid workers do not go backwards. Will your government's submission this year still include this recommendation?
Minister Farrell.
It's energy, now it's
deliberate design feature.
Order. I've called the Minister. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Cash for her question. So you've correctly identified what the submission that we put to the Fair Work Commission last year, and of course we will prepare an appropriate response to the next national wage case. I think it's important to realise that under your government, of course, low wages were a design feature of your economic overall economic strategy. And when we went to the election, we said we were going to turn things round and start putting upward pressure on wages so that ordinary working Australians who worked very hard for their living got an appropriate recompense for labour. And that's what we did. And of course, within weeks, I think it might have been, of coming to power last year, of course, there was a national wage case. My recollection was that we proposed a 5.1% increase, and of course the Commission, in a structured sort of way, started out at 5.2%. So I think, if the Australian people think about the difference between the two governments and what we've done in terms of putting upward pressure on wages to try and give people a chance to deal with the issue of rising prices, then of course we have delivered for the Australian people.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Cash, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. In May last year, Mr Albanese was asked if he supported a pay rise of 5.1%, the rate of inflation at the time. He replied, absolutely. Further adding, we think no one should go backwards. Inflation is now at 7.4%. Is it still the government's policy that wages shouldn't go backwards?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister Farrell.
Well, of course it's our policy. Of course it's our policy that wages not go backwards, and we've delivered on this. In the first national wage case that came before the Fair Work Commission after we came to government, of course, we put a submission to the Fair Work Commission on that very point. And of course, as I said in my previous answer, that was in stark contrast to your position in government, where a design feature of your economic policy was to keep downward pressure on wages. There is a new national wage case. Of course, we are preparing. We've got an excellent minister, Minister Burke, in this portfolio area. He's in the process of preparing his submissions.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Cash, second supplementary.
Thank you. And given the Minister has confirmed that it is the government's policy that no one should go backwards, I again ask the Minister, will your government's submission to the Fair Work Commission recommend the Fair Work Commission ensures real wages of Australia's low-paid workers do not go backwards, consistent with your policy?
Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. Well, everything, Senator Cash, that this government does is all about trying to assist particularly low-paid workers, but workers generally, deal with the economic mess that your government left us to fix. I mean, all of these problems,
Order.
like
Order.
inflation, were all problems that developed and became problems under your government. You failed to do anything about it. You failed to support Australian workers getting wage rises. We've got the runs. We've got the runs on the board, Senator Cash. We've delivered. We delivered. We delivered in the first few weeks. The first few weeks of coming to government,
the time
we
for
delivered.
Answering has expired. Order. Senator Faruqi.
Thank you, President. My question is to Minister Watt, representing Minister Giles. Today is the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. It's observed throughout the world on the day police in South Africa killed 69 people at a peaceful protest against apartheid in 1960. But only in Australia is 21st March celebrated as Harmony Day, with barely a mention of racism. Harmony Day is a Howard government invention that whitewashes racism and sweeps it under the rug. We know that in Australia, too many people feel the sear of racism every single day. On the weekend, Melbourne saw the despicable alliance of hate with neo-Nazis saluting on the steps of Victorian Parliament. Will the government ditch Harmony Day and Harmony Week and restore the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination with its original purpose of recognising the pervasive nature of racism and combating it?
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Faruqi. You are indeed correct that today is the International Day for the elimination of racial discrimination, and as you say, this recognises both the tragic events that occurred in South Africa all those years ago, but it also marks 75 years since the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and focuses on the urgent need to combat racism and racial discrimination. And the reason I'm aware of that is that I'm reading directly from the tweet that Minister Giles, the Immigration Minister and Multiculturalism Minister, has put up today in recognition of this important event. So to the extent that your question suggests that our government does not adequately recognise the importance of this day, then I have to reject that. And you know, the minister himself has made public the fact that this is an important day for us to remember the importance of eliminating racial discrimination. He's gone on to make the point that the Albanese Labor government has invested $7.5 million to the Australian Human Rights Commission in order to develop a national anti-racism strategy to tackle racism and promote racial equality in Australia. And of course he makes the point, which I would hope that everyone in this chamber shares, that no matter where you were born, the language you speak or the faith you practice, the Albanese government is committed to a multicultural Australia where everyone belongs. So I don't think there can be any doubt where this government stands on these issues, or the minister himself. I think there can be some doubt about the level of commitment across the political spectrum to eliminating racial discrimination, because I, like you, Senator Faruqi, was highly disturbed to see the neo-Nazi demonstration outside the Victorian Parliament and the fact that it included a serving Liberal Party member of the Victorian State Parliament. And I think there are some serious questions for the Victorian Liberal Party and indeed Mr Dutton as to where his party lines up on these issues.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Faruqi, first supplementary.
Minister, last week was the 4th anniversary of the Christchurch Mosque massacre, where 51 Muslims were killed by an Australian white supremacist driven by an extreme right-wing Islamophobic ideology. This morning, the 4th Islamophobia report in Australia was launched, and it shows hatred towards Muslims in Australia remains high, with women and children bearing the brunt of this on the front line. What will the government commit to today to obliterate Islamophobia in Australia?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. Well, as I said in my answer to the primary question, we have already made a commitment that backs up our position on the need to eliminate racial discrimination. As I've said, we have committed $7.5 million to the Australian Human Rights Commission to develop a national anti-racism strategy to tackle racism and promote racial equality in Australia, and we've commenced work on our election commitment of delivering a multicultural framework review. I noticed, Senator Faruqi, that your primary question asked when the government intends to eliminate Harmony Day, or words to that effect. I guess that might be a question you might also like to put to Mr Bant, who in March last year hopped on Facebook to say, "Fantastic to be at Carlton Harmony Day at Carlton Primary School with Ellen Sandell today, celebrating just what makes Melbourne so brilliant." So maybe we've all got a little bit to think about on this International Day of needing to eliminate racial discrimination. Once again, the Greens like to tell people what to do, not so good at doing it themselves.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Faruqi, second supplementary.
Minister, the climate crisis is a racial justice issue. Those who contributed least to the crisis, black and brown people in the Global South, are and will experience the worst of it. The IPCC report today makes clear that a livable future means no new fossil fuels. Will the government finally listen to science and rule out new coal and gas?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. Well, I think we're sort of jumping portfolios here, but I do agree that it is people living in the developing world who are most at risk of the effects of climate change. That is self-evident, and it is an important reminder why all of us in this chamber should get behind initiatives to do something serious about climate change. And you know what? I've got an idea. It's called the Safeguards Mechanism. Perhaps that might be the kind of thing that the Greens might choose to back in as a means of trying to reduce emissions and reduce the impacts on climate change, whether they be here or in developing countries. This fortnight this parliament, this chamber, is going to have the opportunity to actually do something about tackling climate change, not just performing, not just doing stunts, not just doing memes for social media, but actually doing something concrete to tackle the impact of climate change in developing countries. So, Senator Faruqi, I look forward to your support when it comes to a vote for that, to have an opportunity to actually do something real.
Thank you, Minister Watt. The time has expired. Senator Sterle, first question.
Thank you, President. While the minister's on a roll, my question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, Senator Watt. The Albanese government's National Reconstruction Fund promises to be a landmark policy that will transform Australian industry and revitalise our manufacturing sector. How will the NRF benefit Australian agriculture, Minister?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Sterle, who's known throughout this chamber and throughout this parliament as a strong supporter of Australian agriculture, including as the fabulous chair of the RAT committee, where he does a terrific job. Good to see he's not lacking in confidence in that respect. The Albanese Labor government wants Australia to be a country that makes things again. What a revolutionary idea that is, to be a country that makes things again. After more than 10 years of our manufacturing industry being run down by a Liberal and National Party government that literally dared our car industry to leave this country. We want a country that supports Australian manufacturing and the development of our sovereign capabilities. We don't ever want to be in the same situation that Australia was in through COVID, where all of a sudden we didn't have the capacity to make ventilators, to make PPE, to make all the other things, the RAT tests, all the other things that we were caught short on. And that's why we need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and have greater sovereign capability. And that's exactly what the Albanese government's National Reconstruction Fund is all about. The National Reconstruction Fund is about transforming the Australian economy. It's a $15 billion investment in securing our future prosperity, adding value to our natural resources and bolstering critical supply chains. The National Reconstruction Fund will provide finance to drive investments in 7 priority areas of the Australian economy. And pleasingly, one of those areas is via a $500 million sub-fund for value-adding in agriculture, forestry, fisheries, food and fibre. This fund will unlock potential and value add to raw materials in sectors like food processing, textiles, clothing and footwear manufacturing. Importantly, it would also invest in agricultural supply chain products, such as fertiliser, which would help drive down input costs for farmers right around the country. And I can tell you over the last few weeks I've been meeting with quite a lot of farmers' organisations, telling them about the National Reconstruction Fund and how it can help with fertiliser costs and everything else, and they all think this is something we should all
The time
get
for answering
behind.
has expired. Senator Sterle, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. The National Reconstruction Fund will invest at least $500 million in value-adding in the agriculture, forestry and fisheries sector.
Order. Please continue, Senator.
We know that these sectors generate economic activity and jobs in regional Australia, Minister. So how will the NRF support businesses and create manufacturing jobs in regional Australia?
Before I call the minister, I remind senators that interjections across the chamber are very disorderly. Minister, please continue.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Sterle. Well, the National Reconstruction Fund is about creating jobs, secure jobs, well-paid jobs, blue-collar jobs, jobs in our regions, and a number of the NRF priority areas have a strong regional presence, sectors such as resources, agriculture, defence and renewables. In fact, 1/3 of manufacturing jobs in our country are located outside our capital cities, and that's exactly why we should get behind the National Reconstruction Fund, and that's exactly why any party that claims to represent regional Australia should be backing in the National Reconstruction Fund as well. But don't take my word for it. Let's just have a look at what some of the stakeholders who actually care about regional Australia have to say. The NFF President, Fiona Simpson, when this was announced, I am heartened by Mr Albanese's support for the NFF's call for a renaissance of regional manufacturing. Labor's announcement is a step in the right direction. Geelong Manufacturing Council, Senator Henderson, you might be interested in this. We strongly congratulate the government for a focus and emphasis on regional development and the National Reconstruction Fund consultation.
Minister.
Get on board, back our regions.
Has expired. Senator Sterle, second supplementary. Order. Order. Senator Henderson. Order. 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 Senator Ayres. I have a senator on his feet. Senator Sterle, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. President, I can't even hear myself.
Just resume your seat, Senator Stills. I've just reminded senators that interjections across the chamber are disorderly, and I expect you to cease. Senator Still, please continue.
Protection, President. It is clear to me that it is vital that the National Reconstruction Fund passes this parliament to support economic growth and secure jobs in our regions. So, Minister, are there any risks to these reforms passing the parliament?
Minister Watt.
Well, Senator Sterle, I'm very sorry to inform you that there are some risks to these reforms passing the parliament. Unfortunately, not everyone is on board with backing our regions and with the Albanese government's plan to transform Australian manufacturing and back good blue-collar jobs. Now, the opposition had the choice to say yes to Australian manufacturing, but they've chosen to say no. They've chosen to say no to new jobs, no to new investment, no to new opportunities, especially in our regions. Whatever the issue, they just say no. It's like being caught in some never-ending loop of Nancy Reagan saying, just say no. That's what the opposition do under the leadership of Peter Dutton, and they're doing it again when it comes to the National Reconstruction Fund. We've been clear from the start. This is a fund which will revitalise Australian manufacturing and develop Australia's industrial capability. It was never about investing in coal, gas or native forestry, despite the Greens patting themselves on the back for getting a win that they didn't actually get. This is about rebuilding manufacturing in Australia. This is about good blue-collar jobs, and it's about time the opposition got behind it.
The time for answering has expired. Senator David Pocock.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Communications, Senator Murray Watt. Is the government aware that Australians are being exposed to illegal advertisements on their social media feeds from online casinos?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Watt.
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Obviously, you didn't get the memo that all the questions were supposed to go to Senator Farrell this week, but happy to have an attempt at this. I have heard the media reporting about this issue this morning. I'll attempt to get some more information on this point for you during question time, but I do think that all Australians are concerned about the growing proliferation of gambling advertising on online forms. There's, of course, particular concerns when it comes to the risk around those advertisements being accessed by children. I know, as a parent myself, I'm pretty disturbed about the amount of online advertising that goes on around gambling, which can clearly be accessed by children, if not being in fact targeted by children. And of course there are additional concerns about the risk of online gambling advertisements to the adult population as well. This is something that needs a close exploration of to make sure that our regulatory systems are adequate for the task. And this is something that I know Minister Rowland takes very seriously. She has already commenced work on a range of fronts when it comes to online advertising, particularly in relation to gambling, and that's something that our entire government supports, because we do want to make sure that the regulatory settings that we have in place for online advertising are suitable. This is obviously a fast-evolving field. It's one of those areas where the minute that governments intervene and create a regulatory environment, new operators come on board and find loopholes, and it's something that we do always need to review. I think more generally, when it comes to gambling advertising, I can assure you that the Albanese government recognises the importance of gambling promotions being presented in a responsible manner. We also recognise that there is ongoing community concern about the harms associated with online gambling, including advertising material, and I think that it is timely for Parliament to consider what more should be done to address this issue. And Senator Pocock, I look forward to working with you on that.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pocock, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Thank you, Minister. Will the government commit to taking action to close these loopholes and ensure that the regulator ACMA does have the power to enforce them?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Watt.
Thanks again, Senator Pocock. And as I say, the Albanese government does recognise ongoing community concern about harms associated with online gambling, and that's exactly why we have established an inquiry into online gambling and its impacts on those experiencing gambling harm. That inquiry is being conducted by the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Social Policy and Legal Affairs, and if I'm not mistaken, that's being chaired by Peter Murphy, one of our outstanding members in the House of Representatives, and I've seen some of the media coverage that she's obtained in talking about this important issue. This committee is considering the effectiveness of current gambling advertising restrictions on limiting children's exposure to gambling products and services, including through social media, sponsorship or branding, among a range of other issues. And you're asking Senator Pocock what the government intends to do about it. I guess the first step is to consider the committee's recommendations when it releases its final report, and I can assure you they will be properly considered.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Pocock, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Minister. Once the committee reports back and you make those changes, will you commit to ensuring that ACMA can actually enforce them? At the moment, there's a variety of areas where ACMA has no jurisdiction, and it seems to me that's something that also needs to be updated.
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Watt.
Thank you, Senator Pocock. It would obviously be premature for me or anyone from the government to comment on what we will do in response to that inquiry and its recommendations. But I acknowledge the issues that you've raised about the jurisdiction of ACMA, and if that is something that the committee finds as something that needs some changes made, then of course we would do that. Senator Pocock, I'm not sure what engagement you've had with that inquiry up until this point, but of course you, like every member of the public, are entitled to make a submission to that inquiry, and I'd certainly encourage you to do so if you haven't done so already, because we do think that this is a really important issue. We want to hear from the broad range of the Australian public about how we can best address it. And as I say, should the inquiry recommend that we make the type of changes that you're talking about in relation to ACMA, then I'm sure that we would listen very closely to that.
Thank you, Minister Watt. Senator McKenzie.
Thank you very much, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Minister, yesterday in question time, when asked if your government would scrap Stage 3 tax cuts, you declared, and I quote, "Our policy on these tax cuts hasn't changed." Can you clarify for the Senate what exactly your policy is?
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I'm very happy to. I've been saying that in this place for some time. I think Senator McKim asks me virtually every sitting week an answer about Stage 3 tax cuts. Fact is, Stage 3 tax cuts has been legislated by this chamber. They are in place. The Stage 3, I think, will commence in July next year. The Labor, the policy we took to the election was that those tax cuts remain in place, and our position hasn't changed. So that is what I was saying yesterday. That continues to be our position. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone. That's the position that we have had for some time. And of course, I think the position that Senator McKim raises with me on this issue is, related to the budget pressures that we have and how we're going to meet those pressures, and they are real. We've inherited $1 trillion of Liberal debt. The debt had doubled before the pandemic. We've got a lot of pressures coming our way. We had a lot of time bombs or little booby traps built into the budget that we inherited, and we're working through all those. So there is enormous pressure on the budget, and that's the context with which I gave that answer yesterday.
Thank you, Minister. Senator McKenzie, first supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, given you've stated numerous times that your government policy hasn't changed in relation to the Stage 3 tax cuts, can you guarantee it won't be subject to change in the future?
Minister.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator McKenzie for the question. Well, our policy on the tax cuts has not changed. That is the position that we are in. We have made it clear that our position in relation to taxation changes around multinational tax reform, which was put in place in the October budget, and the modest change that we've announced in relation to superannuation. But the issue more broadly around how we manage the budget is real, and I want people to understand that we inherited a budget in a complete...
Minister,
well, I've answered the question.
Senator McKenzie.
On relevance to the question asked, Madam President, I asked if it wouldn't be subject to change in the future. The Minister, in my first question, answered whether the policy had changed to the present, My question was about future changes to this particular policy area.
Senator Mackenzie, and the minister has answered the first part of your question, and you've just reminded her of the second part. So, Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. And I did answer the question when I answered Senator Mackenzie's supplementary, which is that our position on tax cuts hasn't changed, but we are in the position of having to repair a budget that was vandalised by those opposite for a decade. Budget vandals that have left a $50 billion structural deficit, despite themselves rorting and pork barrelling all around the country.
Time has expired. Senator Mackenzie, second supplementary. Order.
Know when they're on the run, when they just go on the attack and refuse to answer the question. Absolutely. My second supplementary then, Minister, why won't your government demonstrate the same level of transparency it called for in opposition and actually rule out further changes to the Stage 3 tax cuts?
I'm going to wait for order before I call the minister. Order. Minister.
When I reflect, thank you, President, on ways to describe the Morrison government, transparency is not one of those issues that springs to mind as one of those first ways that you would describe it. I think there's a lot of words, there's a lot of adjectives that you would use, but transparency is not one of them. We are 10 minutes,
Minister
10
Gallagher,
months.
please resume your seat. I'm going to wait for order again. Minister Gallagher, please continue.
Thank you. Transparency is not one of those words. Anyway, we're 10 months in to cleaning up. No, integrity would not be another one. No, we could play word bingo, couldn't we? Rorts.
Minister Gallagher, please resume your seat. Order. Order. Order on my right. Senator Watt. Senator Watt. I've got a senator on her feet. Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, it was relevancy to the question. You called for a level of transparency in opposition, and I'm asking you why you won't demonstrate that level of transparency when in government.
Thank you, Senator Mackenzie. That was part of your question, and you also referred to the previous government, and I believe that the minister is being relevant. Senator Mackenzie?
Point of order. The question doesn't refer to the previous government at all.
Senator Mackenzie, you said as we did, which does refer to the previous government.
They did.
Thank you, Senator Mackenzie. I believe the minister is being relevant. She has 21 seconds to go. Minister Gallagher.
The question was about transparency, and we are being transparent. We're being very transparent with the budget mess that we inherited from those budget vandals opposite. A $50 billion structural deficit every year, pork barrelling all around the country, $1 trillion of Liberal debt, not enough to show for it. That's the transparency, and we are being honest with the Australian people about it.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Defence. The AUKUS submarine deal appears to be creating division within government ranks. The Labor member for Fremantle was reported to have said, and I quote, "While I support the work of the government, I'm not completely convinced that nuclear-propelled submarines are the only or best answer to our strategic needs." End quote. The Labor member for Higgins, after questioning the decision to buy submarines in the Labor Party room, later issued a statement saying, and I quote, "I now fully support the government's announced AUKUS plan." End quote. Fully support, huh? This deal reportedly doesn't deliver a submarine to Australia for 10 years, and I'll tell you from where I'm standing, that's going to be on a good day. What's more, this government doesn't start building submarines in Australia for 2 decades. Can the minister explain to Australia how we can trust the government on this purchase when some of its own backbenchers do not?
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Senator Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Lambie for her question, and I'll perhaps start my answer by sort of saying we're a democracy in the Labor Party, and people can express a point of view.
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Order on my left. Order. Order. This is a question asked by Senator Lambie, and the disorder coming particularly from my left is making it impossible for me to hear the minister's answer. Minister, please continue.
Thank you, President. So, look, we've got a history of democratic thought in the Labor Party, and people are always been free, to express a point of view. But I think the important thing here is, and the AUKUS announcement last week was obviously a great triumph. It was obviously a great triumph for Prime Minister Albanese, but a great triumph for our country. But look, there are lots of details about the AUKUS decision, and I'd encourage everybody to ask questions, even the opposition. I don't think we've had a single question in the last 2 days about AUKUS. We haven't had a single question. So I give you credit. Senator Lambie, for focusing on the issue. But look, can I say, I've got
Minister
complete
Farrell,
faith.
please resume your seat. Senator Hughes. Thank you. Please continue.
Thanks, President. And I know they're embarrassed that they haven't asked a question, and that it's now been Senator Lambie. Senator Lambie has had the courage to ask the questions. Now, can I say this? The Labor Party is 100%
Thank you, Minister. The
behind
time for answering
the Prime
has
Minister.
expired. Order. Senator Lambie, first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. Australian manufacturing was destroyed by the last government. During their government, we saw closures of manufacturing plants. They forced car manufacturers out. They slashed research and development. They locked apprentices out of work. Will the minister please explain how a deal that doesn't start building submarines for 20 years will help Australian manufacturing today?
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Minister Farrell.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, look, I agree with you, Senator Lambie. It was a disgrace the way in which the former government forced Holden and then Toyota out of this country. This government is about building.
Order across the chamber. Order across the chamber. Order, Senator Farrell.
This government is about building things in Australia again, and I take your point. That the delay, the 10 years of delay, under the former government about announcing when these submarines would be built,
Senator
of course,
Henderson.
has pushed back the date of the construction of those submarines. But can I say this? There's a whole lot of other aspects that you have to build before you get to building the submarines. And I'd be happy to host you down in Osborne in South Australia to see some of the construction that's about to start. Well, I'd like to go there too.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Lambie's second supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. I'll ask you to come to the state of Tasmania and I'll tell you why. In my state of Tasmania, we have apprentices learning their trade in TAFEs that are underfunded and under-resourced. This morning I heard from a young electrician apprentice in Tasmania. He's being taught his trade on 1950s equipment with valves from the Soviet Union. So when will this government make sure that our TAFEs have the equipment and resources required to adequately teach our kids to build submarines?
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Minister Farrell.
Well, I will happily come down to Tasmania, as I just did recently, to look at some of your wonderful tourism. No, there's more than vineyards. There's more than vineyards down there. I went to a mushroom production. I went to the wooden boats exhibition. But we're about creating jobs in the areas that you've specifically mentioned, Senator Lambie. And I'm pleased you're asking questions about manufacturing jobs, because I haven't had I haven't had a single question. I haven't had a single question from the coalition on this issue. But we are all about creating jobs in Australia, particularly.
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Senator Lambie.
Sorry, Madam President. I just wanted to know when this government will be making sure our TAFEs have the equipment and resources required to adequately teach our kids to build submarines. Is there a date or timeline on that? That's all I'm looking for.
Thank you, Senator Lambie. I'll just remind the minister of the question that you asked. Minister.
Thank you, President. And we're doing this right now, Senator Lambie. We've revitalised the TAFE system in this country.
Thank you, Minister. Your time for answering has expired. Senator Polley.
President, my question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Can the Minister explain how the Housing Australia Future Fund will improve housing outcomes for Australians and make them affordable?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Polley for the question and also acknowledge her long advocacy for housing and housing support for people doing it tough in Tasmania. The Albanese government wants every Australian to have the security of having a roof over their head, and we know that too many Australians are being hit by growing rents and also those struggling to buy a home. And sadly, there's far too many Australians who are facing homelessness. Part of this situation is brought about, of course, because of the decade of inaction and lack of leadership we had from those opposite when they were in power. But we were elected with a plan to clean up the mess that was left behind and deal with some of the country's housing challenges where we can. Fundamental to our plan is increasing the supply of new housing, and the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund will be the largest boost to social and affordable housing in a decade. The homes that will be delivered through the fund over the first 5 years are one part of our ambitious housing agenda, which also includes broadening the National Housing Infrastructure Facility, the Housing Accord, the $1.6 billion per annum National Housing and Homelessness Agreement, the Interim National Housing Supply and Affordability Council, a new National Housing and Homelessness Plan. We'll also implement the Help to Buy scheme and the regional first home buyer guarantee. I think it is something, again, that will come to this chamber in the next, as part of this fortnight, and we are hoping that we can have the support of the whole chamber in making sure that we are supporting the injection of resources and capacity into the social and affordable housing sector. It's important for women fleeing domestic violence. It's important for single women who are at risk of homelessness. It's important for veterans who are facing homelessness. I think this is a bill that we need to pass through this Senate, and hopefully with the support of everybody.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Polley, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. Can the Minister provide an update on the support demonstrated by those working on the front line with people experiencing housing stress for the Housing Australia Future Fund?
Thank you, Senator Polley. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Polley for the supplementary. We know that too many people are paying the price for a former government that didn't believe the Commonwealth had a role in addressing the housing needs of all Australians. However, in the Senate last week, housing experts working at the coalface of Australia's housing challenges gave their view of the Housing Australia Future Fund. National Shelter called it the most critical housing legislation to be brought forward in the past 10 years. The Cities Future Institute said it's a timely reassertion of national leadership on housing, and Power Housing described it as a transformative reform that will enable the housing needs of more Australians to be met. There was near unanimous support for the bills to pass by representatives and stakeholders of this sector, and acknowledgement that any delay would greatly impact those Australians who most need the housing that it would provide. I would urge those senators in this place, considering their position on this bill, to listen to the views of those that work in the sector about what needs to be done.
Senator Polley, second supplementary.
President, we on this side of the chamber understand the urgency of this fund, but can the minister please explain why it is urgent for the Housing Australia Future Fund to be delivered?
Thank you, Senator Polley. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Polley for the question, the supplementary. So after no Commonwealth leadership for the last decade, we have taken substantial steps in the last 10 months since forming government to turn the tide. When asked if the Senate should act more quickly to support our government's package, the Community Housing Industry Association declared it was absolutely urgent. The Housing Industry Association said we have to put something in place right now, and the Property Council said the quicker all of these mechanisms are up and running, the better. Every day we hear from stakeholders about the need in the sector and the importance of the passage of these housing reforms to ensure that we are getting resources into the sector. And again, I would urge those, including those opposite, that say no to everything. They say no to wage rises, they say no to the industrial relations reform, they've said no to renewable energy, they say no to help with the power bills, they say no to the safeguard mechanism, they say no to the NRF, they say no to everything. Don't say no to the Housing Australia
Future
Minister.
Fund. Your time has expired. Senator Ruston. Senator Ruston.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Farrell. Did Labor make an election promise to older Australians that every aged care home would have a registered nurse on site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by the 1st of July 2023?
Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Ruston for her question. Well, I think it's there's a certain irony, I suppose, is the word that I would use in the coalition raising the issue of aged care when we saw such tragedy and well, that's the word, neglect by the former government in this area. Under the Albanese government, we intend to turn things around in the aged care sector. Unfortunately, we can't wave a wand and solve all of the problems that we inherited from the former government, but we're working on it. And of course, the first thing we're doing, of course, is putting nurses back into nursing homes, and we're putting dignity and respect back into the centre of aged care, something that was not done by the previous government. Now, residential aged care homes will be required to have a registered nurse on site and on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from the 1st of July 2023, in line with the government's election commitment. It's in this way that neglected older Australians get the respect that they didn't get, that they failed to get under the previous government. And of course, the promise I've just referred to there was a recommendation.
Thank you, Minister. Your time for answering has expired. Senator Ruston, first supplementary.
Thank you. Thank you, President. Wow. Noting that this was a key election commitment which you have just reaffirmed, Minister, yesterday the Minister for Aged Care conceded that the government mandated requirements for nursing cannot be delivered. Is this a broken promise?
Order on my right, Minister Farrell.
Shame.
Well, again, I thank you, President, and thank Senator Ruston for her question. Again, I'm surprised that this is an area in which the opposition are asking questions, given the lack of action and the lack of respect for the aged care sector in the former government. We committed to implementing a new 24/7 nursing standard in residential aged care in response to the Aged Care Royal Commission.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Ruston.
Thank you. On relevance, Madam President, I was actually asking the Minister in relation to a comment that was made by the Minister yesterday in reflecting on his answer to my primary question, and just wondered whether the minister would like to correct the fact that he appears to have misled the chamber.
You've raised the point of order. The minister was being relevant to the first part of your question. I'll remind him of the second part. Thank you, Minister Farrell, which was in relation to comments the Aged Care Minister made yesterday.
Thank you, President. Look, I can understand why the opposition is embarrassed that this government is taking action in respect to restoring some dignity.
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Senator Birmingham.
President, in your previous ruling, in response to Senator Ruston's point of order, you indicated the minister had been relevant to the first part of her question but directed him to the second part of her question. Instead, Senator Farrell has got to his feet and simply begun reflecting upon things that are completely irrelevant to the second part of Senator Ruston's question, which went to statements made by the Minister for Aged Care yesterday. I ask you to draw the minister not just to Senator Ruston's question, but to comply with your ruling, President.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. I'll remind Senator Farrell of the second part of the question on which I directed him. Thank you, Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. And look, this is a very simple.
Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Ruston, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, hoping that you understand the workforce challenges that are particularly acute in rural, regional and remote Australia, will you guarantee that no more aged care facilities will close as a result of the actions of your government?
Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thanks Senator Ruston for the question. Look, we're putting dignity and respect back into the centre of the aged care system in Australia. And as I said in response to your first question, we're putting nurses back into nursing homes. We want the neglect. We want the neglect of the previous government to end.
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Senator Ruston.
Thank you, President. Again, on relevance, my question was very specific about a guarantee that the actions of the government—
Senator Polley, just a moment, Senator Ruston. Order on my right. Please continue.
Thank you, President. As I said, on relevance, my question was very specific in relation to a guarantee by the government that no nursing homes would close down as a result of actions of this government. I don't believe the minister has gone anywhere near the question.
Thank you, Senator Ruston. You also talked about workforce challenges, and the minister is being relevant to the question. Minister Farrell, please continue.
Thank you, President. False and misleading claims that aged care homes will be forced to close are irresponsible and not based on any fact. They cause unnecessary alarm, and I'm disappointed in you, Senator Ruston. They cause unnecessary panic, stress and alarm.
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Order. Senator Ruston.
President, I just ask you, if you may, ask the minister if he reflects on the accuracy of his answers.
That's not a point of order, Senator Ruston. Please continue, Senator Farrell.
I am happy to reflect on the accuracy of my answers, and I think they are accurate.
The time for answering has expired.
That further questions be put on the notice paper. Thank you.